you guys, today I'm going to show you 3 different ways how to make wood inlays with your laser, just like this one. Without any further ado, let's get started. Hey you guys, I'm so excited. Today we're going to talk about my favorite subject when it comes to lasers, and that is making wood inlays. I've been making wood inlays now for a few years. I started with just traditional router using templates to make inlays. From there, I bought a small handheld CNC machine, the Shaper Origin, and I've been using that. And then 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I received my first laser, and I tried to make inlays with the laser, and it turns out that's the easiest way to make inlays, and it became my favorite way. I've been making tons and tons of inlays since then. So let's get started, and I'll show you 3 ways that you can do this wood inlays. Now, what are the requirements for you to be able to make this kind of wood inlays? Well, you need to have a laser, obviously. It doesn't matter how strong your laser is. I think anything over 10 watts, it's going to work just fine. I've done this kind of inlays with 10 watts. You might be able to do it with 5 watts. I've never tried it, but that might be a little bit trickier. So 10 watts, 20 watts, 30, 40, anything more than that, it's going to work perfectly. I will be using, on today's demonstrations, I'll be using my Xtool P2S because that's my favorite machine from my favorite brand, and that's what I use in my shop for 90% of the time. So that is the machine I will be using. Now, the first inlay I will be showing you is the easiest out of the 3 methods, and it's the method I use 90% of the time. And we will be making this inlay over here with this just inside of a napkin holder that I've made. Very, very simple inlay, and it doesn't take much time at all. When you look for a design for this technique of inlay, look for something simple, maybe just, one object, like a silhouette. Look for something that doesn't have more than maybe 10 pieces, and the pieces are fairly large, so you don't lose them into the laser bed. So those are the kind of designs I'm looking for this first technique. Now, it's important you watch this video until the end, because the second technique and the third technique will show you something completely different, and it's good to know all 3. So for first design, how did I make this? So let's get started with the first design. Now, all these files that I used for today's videos, I did get them from Creative Fabrica. I am not sponsored by them. I purchased a membership with my own money. It's $3.99 per month. I'll put a link to it in the description below. They have thousands and thousands of laser files for all kinds of projects, and you can use them commercially, so that's why I purchased the membership for less than $4 a month. I thought it was very cheap compared with buying files on Etsy. To make a wood inlay, you need 2 pieces of wood. You need your thicker piece of wood where you'll create a pocket, and then you need the thinner piece of wood that is the inlay that goes inside that pocket. So it all starts with the thicker piece of wood that you will create the pocket in. In my case, it was a plank of walnut. So I put my plank of walnut into the laser machine. Like I said, I'm using the Xtool P2S, but any laser machine would work. And then in the software, I brought in my SVG image, and then I resized it to fit nicely onto my piece of wood, the size that I wanted to get the inlay. Now, to help me center my design onto my plank of wood, I also created a square, a rectangle or a square, whatever you want to call it, onto the software, and I made that square exactly the size of my plank of wood. Which was, this size that I needed for my napkin holders. And I did that because then I could choose my design and the square and then align them vertical and horizontal, so that way they get centered within each other, and that way my design is smack in the middle. So now it's time to engrave the pocket. For all 3 methods of making wood inlays, we'll start with the pocket. The pocket is created exactly the same way for each one of these methods. So I'm only going to show you once how I created the pocket, and then just know this is exactly what I did for the next 2 versions. So to create the pocket, I just did a deep engrave. In my case, for my laser, I use 90% power and I use 80 speed. And that should give me a pocket that is just a little bit shallower than the 1/16 that I use for the inlay piece. I let the machine do its thing, and then there I was with a plank of wood that has a pocket deep engraved in it. Now for this pocket, I have not used any kind of curve offset or anything. I just adjusted the speed and the power, and I cut the pocket. Once we have the pocket, now it's time to cut our pieces that will go inside the pocket. And for this one, like I said, I've used a 1/16 thickness material. You can use 1/8, it doesn't matter. But I had some curly maple that was 1/16, and I thought the contrast would look very pretty between the walnut and the curly maple. So now with the material into the machine, it was time to cut my pieces. Now when you cut the pieces for inlay, you have to account for the curve of your laser spot. For my machine, which is a CO2 laser, like I said, I use the Xtool P2S. My curve size is 0.15. I reviewed over 23 lasers in the last 2 years from all kinds of, from 10 watt, 20 watts, 40 watts, and so on. And I came to the conclusion after reviewing all these lasers that it's pretty much for a 10 watt laser, the curve is usually 0.06. For a 20 watt laser, it's 0.08. For a 40 watt laser, usually 0.15. And your laser, it could be a little bit different, but that's a good starting point. And the way to test your curve, to find your curve of your laser, you can buy all kinds of files online and to test it and figure out what your curve is. The easiest way is, let's say you have a 20 watt diode laser. What I would do is I would engrave a circle, let's say, or a square. Let's make a square, 1/2 inch square. You make a pocket and deep engrave it into the wood. And then you cut a 1/2 inch square to put in as an inlay and add a curve of, if you have a 20 watt laser, you would add a curve of 0.08. And then you try to put it into the pocket. If you have a lot of gap around it, that means you need to add a bigger curve. So instead of 0.08, you might want to go with 0.1 and then try again. If your piece is too big and doesn't fit on the pocket, that means your curve was too much and you need to put a smaller curve, maybe a 0.06. And usually that should get you right there to find your curve within the first or the second try. Like I said, all the laser I've tested so far, that's the curve they had based on the wattage, except the latest laser from WeCreate. They are 45 watts that I just reviewed. That one was a 0.8 for 45 watts. So now once you know the curve, you cut your piece, and then you have these loose pieces that will fit into your pocket perfectly. From there, all you need to do is to put some glue into the pocket. Make sure you use a brush or something to get that glue all around, all in the tiny spaces, even into the corners and the walls of your pocket. And then you just carefully place all those pieces into the pocket. It fits like a puzzle. And then you clamp it, let it dry, you sand it, and there you go. We have a beautiful inlay. In my case, was this a boat inlay, and I think it looks fantastic. So that is the first and the simplest method to get an inlay. Let's move to the next method. What if, let's say you want to do an inlay of a tiger, and it has all those stripes and all those pieces and the eyes, and you end up with like 100 little pieces. Well, this method wouldn't work for you, the one that we just did, because all those tiny pieces, you're gonna lose track of them, you're gonna lose them into the laser bed, and it's gonna be a nightmare to do the glue up. So we need a different method for this. For the second method, I did this inlay over here just because it has a lot of little pieces to, replicate that, let's say, tiger inlay you want to do. And for this one, we start with the pocket, which we'll do it exactly the same way we did it into the boat, like on the boat inlay. So just a deep engrave, create a pocket the size of the design you are going to do the inlay. So when it comes to cutting the inlay part, now we need to come up with a method where it keeps all of our pieces together so they don't get scattered around, we don't get them confused and misplace them, and we don't know which way to glue them. So for that, we need to create an inverted image of our design. So that means if let's say we are going to create the pocket for this yellow heart where it was, then the inverted is we're going to create pocket for all the negative space, which is the walnut pieces. It will make more sense when I show you. The way to create this inverted image on Xtool is you take your image, you don't resize it. Whatever the pocket was the size, you leave it exactly that way. You do not attach, you do not add any curve to it, nothing. It leaves it exactly the same size as your pocket. And then in this case, because my inlay, it's kind of a rounded shape, I chose to create a circle shape. But if your inlay is more of a rectangle or a square, you can do a rectangle or a square. It doesn't matter what shape it is. It just has to be a little bit bigger than your inlay piece. So I had my design, and then I added a circle. I created a circle that was just a little bit bigger than my design. Then I duplicated that circle, and I moved one of the circles away from the design. And then, because that second circle we will be using to cut out the circle once the design is completely engraved. It makes sense when you see it. So now I have my design, which is exactly the same size. The first thing we need to do is flip it. You need to flip it because once this engraving is happening, the way we will put together the inlay, we take the two pieces and we flip it into each other and it will fit in like a puzzle. So because of that, we need to invert the design for cutting. So we'll move it horizontally, not vertically, horizontally. So first thing you do, you take your design, you flip it horizontally. Then you take that circle that we created that is bigger than your design. So you take the circle and the design, and you right click on it, and then you make a compound vector. So once you have this compound vector, you can see immediately your image changes. Whatever was white becomes black, and whatever was black becomes white. So we have the same engraving, but it's completely flipped. Now we're engraving the negative part of our inlay. So once we created this compound vector, which is just the reversed image that we need to inlay, then we move that second circle over the image to cut it out from our big piece of yellow heart in my case. And then we'll send the file to the computer to engrave the design, the negative image, and then to cut the circle. So we have two layers, we have engrave and cut. Once the engraving is done, we should have two pieces of wood, one that has a hole in it, the pocket for the inlay, and the other piece should be your reverse image engraved, where the image that we need to inlay is kind of raised from your wood. So that way we can just marry them together and get a nice inlay. So now that we have a negative and a positive part, we put them together with glue, we clamp them and let it dry. In the case of a design like this, I suggest you make a mark when you put it on the laser. Let's say this part of the design is the top. I suggest you make a mark that is the top. And then when you do the reverse engraving on another piece, also mark your piece that is at the top. Because in this case, I didn't know, but this flower mandala, it's not symmetrical. Not all the leaves are the same. So then when I went to put my inlay piece into the pocket, it wouldn't fit. I had to keep turning it around until I found exactly the position it needed to be to fit in it. So that's a quick tip for you. Make sure you mark it. In most cases, this will not be necessary because it will be obvious which part is the left and right. Once the glue dries, then because my yellow heart was quite thicker, I think I was working with a 1/4 inch, I had to take it to the bandsaw to cut off the excess wood close to my walnut piece, because if I would have just sanded, it would have taken me forever to sand. If you're working with white 1/8 material, you're probably gonna have just a little bit of material on top, so you can just sand it. But for me, I had to take it to the bandsaw to remove the excess material. Once I cut it at the bandsaw, then I sand it and then put a finish. I just use my board butter for this just so you guys can see what it looks like. And I think it looks fantastic, and my inlay ended up so perfect. I am very, very happy with the way it turned out. So this was the second method of doing inlays. So this method I usually use when I have a ton of pieces and it's something really complicated. But like I said, for 90% of the time I work with simple designs, so I'll use the first method because it is a little bit faster. The second method takes a little bit longer because, well, you're dip engraving the design twice, one on the inlay part and one on the pocket side. Now let's start talking about the third method. The third method, it's not my favorite and I don't really use it much. It's a little bit harder to get good results, especially if you don't have experience. However, I want you to watch this as well because there is a trick in here that will help you a lot with your first method. So keep watching and let's get started with number 3. For the third method, I started with making a pocket. This time the pocket was a lot shallower because we'll be working with veneer. Now veneer wood, it is a lot thinner, and so because of that the pocket has to be a lot shallower. Now remember I said the pocket should be shallower, just a little bit shallower than your piece that goes inlaid in it. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to clamp it and keep the veneer or the wood piece, whatever you're inlaying, tight against the wood to get a good glue up. So the first challenge with this method that I don't like is that you have to get that pocket very, very shallow. I mean, the veneer is already so thin. So if you make the pocket shallower, it has to be just perfect. Now, if accidentally you made the pocket too deep, you could sand it down before you glue in the veneer and to get it shallower. That way you get a good glue up. So we make the pocket just like we made it in the first and second versions of inlays, and then it's time to pick your veneer. Veneer, I recommend you use wood veneer that has not been stained. A lot of these veneers are stained, and that could cause problems, especially if you're using shellac to finish your products, because a lot of the veneers are stained with alcohol-based dyes. So then when you use shellac, it's an alcohol-based finish, so you'll just kind of like smear out and remove finish as you're applying the finish. The color, it will discolorate. So we have the pocket for the third method. We picked our veneer, we know which color we want to inlay. The next step, which is the trick that I was talking about, is to use some of this aluminum duct tape. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it's basically a tape that is aluminum on one side and then it has some paper backing on the other. And this thing, it just peels off and it sticks. Let me see if I can do that. Maybe I'll just cut a piece off to show you. So this aluminum tape peels off the backing just like this, and then the aluminum part is sticky, and you stick this into your veneer. Make sure you use a roller or a squeegee to really get it tight with no wrinkles on your veneer. The reason why we use this aluminum tape, which I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested, is because diode lasers cannot cut metal. So even though this is very thin, you can cut it with scissors and stuff, the laser is not going to be able to cut through it. And we'll use this aluminum tape to keep all of our pieces together. That way they don't get scattered, they don't get lost, and they stay together. So after we put this tape on the back of our veneer, I actually cut it with the scissors, the edges, just to make it prettier. And then what I did is I have taped it to a piece of acrylic, and I taped it on that just to make sure that it stays flat. When you are cutting or you're engraving metal with a diode laser, it hits up and it tends to curl. So that might cause it for your veneer to curl up, and then you don't get an accurate cut, it will be out of focus. So we wanted to keep it completely flat the whole time, so that's why I taped it with blue tape onto my acrylic. And because this is metal and I said diode laser cannot cut through metal, then I knew that wasn't going to cut my acrylic, it just cuts the wood. So with this piece of veneer taped to my acrylic, backed up with this aluminum tape, I put it into laser machine, and this time we are going to engrave the reversed image exactly the way we did it in the second version of our inlays. So we created the inverted image and we are engraving it, and the goal here is to engrave the negative image, removing all that veneer, so then all we have left is the inlay that we want to put into our pocket, and then we just have that bare aluminum left all around it, because we are burning down while we are engraving all the veneer on the negative space. I hope that makes sense. So we send this through the laser, and then when it's done, you should have just the aluminum left and the veneer, and then you have this whole other piece of the veneer that was around the edges. You could just peel that off the tape, which I tried to do that, but it was breaking because it's so brittle. So I just took the scissors and cut around it where the circle is to get rid of all that excess veneer. Now, here is the inlay that I did with the veneer, and one other reason I don't use this so much and I don't like it is because, well, first of all, my pocket was just a little bit too deep for the veneer, so I didn't get a proper glue. If I push on this veneer, it kind of goes into the pocket. It's not really on the bottom of the pocket. And then also when you have the aluminum tape on the back when you glue it, it will not allow airflow, so it takes forever to dry. So even though it's faster than the second method of making inlays to cut it, because it's less material, it's just a thin veneer, gluing it takes forever. You definitely have to leave it overnight. I left mine for a few hours, and then when I went to peel off the aluminum tape, the glue was still very, very wet. I was almost pulling out the veneer as I was peeling out the tape. So I don't prefer this method. I feel like just working with wood without the tape, it's so much better. And then another reason I like the second method better than the third, it's because when I did the yellow one, because I was working with wood, I had my relief was standing out a lot more, so it was a lot easier to feel it as I was putting it into the pocket. I could feel it when it clicked in and all the pieces were in the pocket where they were supposed to be, versus with a veneer, it's so thin when you're trying to figure out if it's in the pocket or not. It is very hard to feel, and you know, I've tried it a few times and I was not always very accurate with that. So it takes a little bit more experience. When you work with veneer, it's also harder because the veneer, it is so thin, so that when you go on into sanding the excess glue and junk that you have around, it's very, very easy to sand right through it. And that is a big problem. I don't like to have that. So second method, it's my favorite when it comes to working with designs that have a lot of pieces that I need to keep together. Now, why I love this aluminum tape for the first method of inlay that we showed you? Well, let's say I have an inlay that has 20, 30 pieces, and I don't want to take the time to do too deep engravings to do the second method. Well, what I can do is I can put this aluminum tape onto my veneer piece and cut it, not engrave it, cut it exactly how we did the first step. And then I can take the whole piece together. It's already still stuck to my aluminum, and I have the whole design in my hand. Pieces are oriented the way it's supposed to, so that I can just take piece by piece and glue it into the pocket, but I can see exactly how they're supposed to be oriented. I'm not losing any pieces into the laser bed. Even the small pieces, they will still be attached to the aluminum foil, so I have it all together, making it a way easier glue up. Now, the downside of using the tape method for the first method is the fact that there's no airflow around it when you're cutting it. So that means you will get a lot more charring on the bottom. So it's not good to use it all the time. If you have simple designs, it's best and just cut it normally. But if you do need to use it, that is a trick that will come in really handy for pieces, for inlays that have more than 10 pieces, let's say. So now that you learn how to make inlays, why do we even want to make inlays? Well, other than the fact that they look pretty, I think it's a great way of making your product stand out. And if you want to be successful in these days, you have to make your product stand out. If you're selling on Etsy or Amazon or your website, wherever you might sell, when people scroll through, let's say you're making napkin holders. When you scroll through Etsy for napkin holders, they all look the same. They're square, they're wood, they're pretty much all the same. So people, you need something to make the person stop scrolling and looking at your item. Now, in the last few years, just having engraving personalized item where you can engrave someone's name on it, that was enough back then to make your item stand out and be different. But these days, everybody has lasers, everybody can engrave a name. So having an inlay, it's the one thing that stands out and makes that person stop scrolling and choosing your item versus the other thousands of items that they're scrolling through. So as you can see, making inlays, it's not hard at all. It is actually really easy, but it could really boost your sales. It could make you pay for that laser that you worked so hard to save money and buy. And it's just a really good use of laser. It's my favorite thing to do with the laser. And I hope from now on you are going to take advantage of the technology you have and you are going to start making inlays as well. One last time, let's look again at the inlays. This is the boat inlay that I ended up using for this napkin holder. And then here is the flower inlay. Super nice results. I hope this was helpful to you and you learned something new. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Skylar Ewing and I'll see you in my next video.